Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on turning back the invasion. Although the MSM still will hardly acknowledge that there is a problem with terror, as Tucker is about to point out, however, the leaders within the non-MSM media are now starting to wrestle with the question of what is the most effective solution to support considering the position we are in today. This is a war. We have to face it. We are in another world war. Of course, any general would tell you that the low-hanging fruit of the solution would be to remove George Soros from the battlefield. In the chess world, this would be called the next best move. Soros is at least the public face of the funding of the invasion. For example, although Hungary is blocking the primary land route out of the Middle East into Europe, and God bless Viktor Orban for doing that, Soros is the one funding the NGOs that are bringing boatloads across the Mediterranean, for example. Why hasn't something been done about the person who is the most easily identifiable conduit for much of the importation of this invasion of Europe and probably into the U.S. as well? This is a war. This is no longer strictly in the realm of politics and polite debating societies. In fact, if we lose this war, civilization, that is, civilized society, will be gone. We will be ruled by a culture of death disguised as a theocracy. If they win, there will be no more democracy. There will be no populist political revolts in the future.
Last night, at least 22 innocent people were murdered by a suicide bomber in Manchester, England. Today, President Trump commented on the attack during a joint press conference with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
So many young, beautiful, innocent people living and enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers in life.
Well, you've seen this before, and you know what's going to happen next. Unfortunately, our leaders are going to tell us that acts of terror are just something that happens, like the weather. Just accept it and move on. There is nothing you can do, or better yet, just pretend it's not happening all around you. As Katie Kay, the BBC, put it this morning, Europe is, quote, getting used to attacks like this because they have to, because they're never going to be able to totally wipe this out. You hear that a lot, but consider it for a minute. Why is violent terrorism an inevitability in Europe now? Unless you grew up in Northern Ireland or Italy or the Basque Country, terrorism was not a significant hazard a generation or two ago. Ask someone who was alive then. This is new. Something has changed. What is it? Well, the answer, as most people understand, but relatively few admit, is that demographics change. There are a lot of Muslims living in Europe now. Most of them are indeed decent people, as we're often assured, but a surprisingly large number of them aren't. Check the numbers. In 2006, after just a year after terrorists murdered more than 50 people in London on the subway bombings, a full 20% of British Muslims said they sympathized with the motives of the bombers. Younger Muslims were even more enthusiastic about what had happened, about the killings. In 2007, Pew found that at least 20% of young Muslims here in America, in France, Germany, and Britain and Spain, believed that suicide bombings could be justified. In France, that number was above 40%. Last year, 29% of French Muslims said they viewed Sharia as a higher law than the civil laws of France. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised that radical views are common among Western Muslims because they're even more common in their home nations. In 2014, 47% of Bangladeshi Muslims said suicide bombings to defend Islam were acceptable, almost half. A quarter of Egyptians said the same thing. A fifth of Turks and Malaysians agreed. In 2009, 78% of Pakistani Muslims told Pew that people who leave Islam should be killed, murder for apostasy. In Egypt, support for that was 86%, Afghanistan 79%, Bangladesh 44%, Iraq 42%. Well, these are not little places, obscure theocracies in remote regions. They're some of the biggest countries in the Muslim world, and more to the point, they've sent millions of immigrants to the West. We could go on like this for the whole show. There's an awful lot of research on this subject, and all the numbers tell the same story. Why are they being ignored? Now, our leaders like to boast they believe in science, that they let data and hard evidence drive their policies. They are lying, and never more obviously than in this case. They don't want to see the numbers. They actively suppress them.
What would you call a group who is responsible for providing accurate numbers to the American people, but who do not do so in order to further undermine civil society? I'd call them traitors, and their actions would be called treason.
If you really cared about America, you wouldn't want it to become Europe, dangerous, divided, unstable. You wouldn't import a massive Muslim minority into your country simply because it made you feel open-minded and virtuous, and then hope for the best. That's a faith-based approach, and it's nuts. We know exactly what will happen if we do that because we're watching it live on television from Manchester right now. If you really cared about the country you led, you'd figure out how to make sure that every person you imported, of any religion, enthusiastically shared your most cherished values: tolerance, pluralism, free speech, equality under the law, just for starters. You tell them not to litter, by the way, when they're here too. We do the opposite. Our leaders worship multiculturalism, so we encourage immigrants to reject our culture in favor of their own, because all cultures are equal, except that they're not all equal, as we were reminded last night with the murder of children in an arena in Manchester. Defend what you believe or you will lose it. That's the message of Manchester, just as it is also the basic lesson of all of history. But what if you don't believe in anything at all? Our leaders don't. Maybe that's why they can't defend us.
Bravo, Tucker. But why haven't we heard this before? Because the MSM is still caught in the clutches of political correctness. We are all inclusive. We are the world, nations without borders, etc., etc. These are the Soros-financed globalists, the ones that are the sworn enemies of American populist freedom. So what to do about it? Here's Tucker's prescription. Find a way to only import people who won't become litterbugs. No, I'm not being snarky. At its root, the success of America is deep down, we believe in the social contract, that this nation can only succeed if we all believe in it and pitch in to do whatever we can to help it.
Majid Nawaz is a former Islamic extremist. He's thought a lot about this. He's co-founder of the anti-Islamist group Quilliam, and he joins us tonight. Nawaz, thanks a lot for coming on. So,
Pleasure.
What's the response from the West that wants to remain pluralist, certainly doesn't want to ban people based on their religion or their country? Most people don't want to do that, but they also don't want to have unstable, chaotic societies. What do they do?
So if we understand it in this way, that there is an ideology that's been recruiting for decades, I say decades, and ISIS simply pluck the low-hanging fruit, then the first thing we need to do is, look, if I was living during the US civil rights crisis, back in the days when segregation was still rife, you would call me an apologist if I didn't get involved to fight segregation, racial segregation. You don't have to be Muslim to challenge this extremism. Muslims and non-Muslims all have to stand together to challenge Islamist theocratic extremism, just as we're responsible to challenge racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and other ills in society. So this is a full-on civil society campaign to reassert and protect our liberal values against these theocratic values, and that genuinely requires action from government, but more importantly from communities.
People have to stop being embarrassed and stand up for the Enlightenment values that our society is based on. It doesn't seem hard, but it is hard, and you are leading the fight for that, and I appreciate your coming on tonight to talk to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm still reporting from Washington. Good day.